Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, but we're going to allow other attendees time to enter the webinar. If you'd like to put in the chat where you're joining us from, we'd love to know. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. We're going to go ahead and get started with a few housekeeping items. Today, we'd like to welcome you to our subject matter expert webinar, 10 Tips for Accessible Publishing with Adobe InDesign. We do have captions available if you select the CC icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen, as well as the stream text links will be posted in the chat. American Sign Language interpretation is also provided, and microphones are muted to prevent any background noises and disruptions. Throughout the webinar, we'll be monitoring the chat for general dialogue questions and technical issues. And if you have any questions, we highly encourage you to post them in the Q&A. With that, I'd like to turn the webinar over to today's speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, and welcome to the webinar. This webinar will be about um, Adobe InDesign and the way that the layout can be managed to make it more accessible or accessible. And it will be pretty technical or practical about how to use InDesign to make accessible publishing. I am Damiano, and I'm an accessible document specialist. I'm also a member of the PDF Association and a PDF expert, especially for accessible standards. And I also teach graphic design, and I'm an Adobe certified expert. So I will go through some aspects of layouts and Adobe InDesign to show you how to cure details of the document and make it accessible. And there will be three parts in the webinar: an introduction on how the structure of the content works in layout, and then a very practical central part of 30 minutes about tips, 10 tips in Adobe InDesign. And finally, a conclusion with questions and answers. Okay, let's start with the introduction. Now I am showing a page, and I could ask to people visually how if they recognize a title in this page. Um, it's a page layout, and it's taken from a magazine, for example. And I'm pretty sure that everyone looking at the page, seeing the page, will point correctly to the title. And that title can be universally recognized as a title. There is no info attached to it. There is no label that says, wow, that's a title, okay? There is no particular sign indicating that it's a title. We just agree that that's the title of the page. There are some basic shared properties of that part of the page that makes it a title. It's bigger, it's at the beginning of the page, it's separated from the rest of the content by some space, some white space. It's pretty easy to recognize it, but if we go deep in the structure of the title, it is also a paragraph. So it's a part of the language, is a unit of language, and that we call a paragraph. So it start and end expressing some content. and it's a paragraph isolated from the rest of the content. Then that content is placed on a page, and there are some graphic characteristic of this title that makes it different from the rest of the objects on the page. And a graphic designer, in this case, picked an outfit to dress up this paragraph for this occasion. And so this outfit is different, is unique to this paragraph, and it's not shared with any other element of the page. And in this case, is a pure graphic design choice. So there are three elements that live together in this title. There is something about content. So we recognize the title. Then there is something about language. It's a paragraph separated from the rest. And there is something about graphic design, some typography or formatting on the letters. As long as those three properties match, we got the perfect condition for accessibility because they go together, okay? So content, language, and graphic design should work together to convey the information, and that's the core of the accessibility. With that in mind, we can start talking about the tips. All the tips will be about the connection between those three elements. The 10 tips are about paragraphs, so how to compose good paragraphs, how and when to use paragraph styles, planning the titles hierarchy on the layout, using glyphs in a professional way, set the correct text language, use articles in InDesign, and how to format table the best way, inline or anchored objects, and how to use properly the table of contents functionality in InDesign, and how to include metadata. It's a starting point to have a accessible document in InDesign, but I have to mention that you can use the same tips in Canva Affinity if you want. Maybe the functionalities will have a slightly different name in your software, but they work. They work in Canva Affinity. So now I'm switching to a layout, and I'm going to use this layout to demonstrate the 10 tips. This is a 5-page layout. And it represents a magazine, for example, that I'm going to use to demonstrate the 10 tips. So let's start with the first one. And the first tip is compose good paragraph. The paragraph is a special, very important unit of a text. And okay, the text is basically organized in paragraph. It's very important to keep the paragraphs clean and to make the paragraph connect directly with language units, with language sentences. In a very basic way, every sentence of the language should have a paragraph, and every paragraph should represent a sentence. There is a direct connection between the functionalities in a graphic design software and the paragraph unit of the language. So if you want a clean, accessible text, you should cure the paragraph. And for example, managing the spaces between the paragraph and avoiding that's very important, avoiding double returns or empty paragraph. And if you need to shape the paragraph, controlling, for example, alignment or hyphenation, you should use the proper functionalities in the paragraph panel. Of course, if the text is using a good language, if the language is built in a good way, also the pagination, the layout of the paragraph would be very good. And most of the many text properties applies to the entire paragraph. For example, indents or alignments, they are paragraph properties. Now it's time to show the result of that. And now I'm showing the PDF, the output PDF of the same page, and the output PDF, the PDF is accessible now, and there is a tag structure in the PDF, and the tag structure represent the different roles of the content on the page, and paragraph is one of them. And it's very important because if you think on how a graphic page is read, you can jump between paragraph and you use paragraph to move around the page and select the content that you want to read. So when you set a paragraph in the layout, the paragraph goes through the export process and stays in the content, and it's tagged. And so assistive technologies can go through paragraph and orientate in the content. The second tip is to use paragraph styles. Once the paragraphs are well set up, you can organize the styles of the paragraph using paragraph styles. So you can reuse different styles and assign a specific role to a paragraph. So for example, in this page, there is a title for the page or for the section, and then there are 3 subtitles, and then there are text paragraphs, and all of them have different typography settings. And so setting a paragraph style for a specific content helps a graphic designer to create the layout faster, but also, and that's very important in accessibility, to assign a role to the paragraph. In this case, if I go into the options of the paragraph styles of the title, there is an export tagging panel where I can set the tag that this specific text will have in the PDF. And this is done using a paragraph style. It's essential to have a paragraph style attached to the text to determine the role that the text will have in the PDF. And in the paragraph style, you can choose if it will be a paragraph or a heading or an artifact on the page. So the paragraph style is an essential tool to define how the accessibility will fit into the document. So the tip here is to always use paragraph style. They are essential to include export tags, the correct export tags for proper tagging of the output. And as they are very important, it is always a good suggestion to use significant style names. So it's very clear when you use the document what the role of the text will be. So assigning, for example, chapter title to a specific paragraph will format the typography of that paragraph in a specific way, but it will also assign an H2 level to the title, or H3, or H1, depending on the style that you have set up. This is directly visible in the output, where titles have a tag assigned to them, and the tag is representing the level of the title. So the tags that you assign to text using paragraph styles move directly to the output PDF. All of these bring us to the next tip that is very connected to paragraph. And the third tip is plan your titles hierarchy. If you think about how you use a printed material, for example, when you open a magazine or a book, and you are searching for informations that are interesting for you, you do not go through all the text of that publication. You scroll, you flip the pages, and you scroll through the content, searching for the topic that is interesting for you. Okay, maybe you have a look at a table of contents, or you quickly scroll through the magazine searching for interesting title, and you jump from one title to another. That is a way to orientate yourself into the content. You do not have to read the whole content to get what the layout or the publication is telling you. And so planning a good title hierarchy is fundamental in graphic design, but also in accessibility, because the navigation of a document works the same way. When you have a well-tagged PDF, you can navigate through the hierarchy of titles. So you can choose, for example, to read only the H3 title, and moving through the titles, searching for the content that you need at that moment, and then you stop your browsing when you have found the content that is interesting to you, and you start to read the text. Just like you do when you flip the pages of a magazine searching for the content visually. And so planning a good hierarchy, it's very important to transmit, to keep that structure both in graphic design and in the accessible structure of the document. That structure should be consistent between graphic layout and accessibility. So, for example, in this document, we have the main title here on the first page. And if I go and look at paragraph style attached to it, the export tagging will be H1. H1 is the main title, and it's the first level. Then I move to page 2, sorry, to page 3, and the content starts. And there is a title on this page, and the level of this title is H2. So both visually and from an accessible perspective, there is a hierarchy on the content. And the same goes for the third level of title. In this case, it's an H3 title, so third level, and it's recognizable both visually and in the structure. The point here is that it doesn't matter how you access the page. You can look at the page or you can navigate in the accessible structure of the page. You get the same content, you get the same feeling of the content, and you can go through the structure of the content the same way. For the tip number 4, I'm leaving the general structure and going into details. The tip number 4 is use glyphs professionally. Um, let's go to page 4. Glyph is the shape that a letter can have, and it's a very refined technology um, that enable us to control in a very, very fine way how the text is represented on the page, but also the way the text is read by assistive technology. So some examples. Behind every shape, there is a content, there is a letter that can be read in different ways. So for example, let's take this one. This is a glyph representing multiplication. So when we read that glyph, we can read it as multiple or times. For example, in this case, it's by 2 times. Okay. And well, there is something typical here. We see a shape, we see a glyph, but we pronounce the glyph in a different way. There is a code behind it probably. And we know that when we see this glyph, we pronounce times. The technology should agree on that. And the correct way to manage it is to use the proper glyph. So avoiding, for example, to use an X instead of the multiplication sign, multiplication glyph. Some example of good of good usage of glyphs are the and dash that is used to separate different logic part of the paragraph, or the hyphen that is used for okay to compose to typeset composed words, or the end dash that is used for gaps. In this case, for example, from 2020 to 2025. Another good example is the glyph that represents the 3 dots. Okay, there are no 3 different dots, but it's a specific glyph representing the 3 dots. Using glyph professionally is very important, even also in letters or word with accents. And the glyphs panel in InDesign represents all the glyph available in a specific font. So the tips here are to use a good font that contains professional glyphs, to use glyph professionally, so using the correct glyph for correct content, and avoiding replacing glyphs with fake symbols or symbols that are similar in their shape but do not represent the correct content. That is very important because when the words will be read by assistive technology, the glyphs should be correct to have the correct output. The tip number 5 is again about details on the text, and is set to text language. And InDesign, as in many layout software, you can set the language of the text. It's a character property. It's a property of the character. So if I go to the character panel, I can set the language. And I can set the language for every single letter or word or paragraph in a layout. That's a way to control directly how the text will be read by assistive technologies. And you should assign the correct language. For example, the main text here is in English. So I set the language to English, but there are some words in different language. There is convivenza here, it's in Italian. So I set the language in Italian specifically on this word. And then there is esprit civique, and it's French. And so I set the language to French. I select those two words and set the language to French. And then there is Gemeinschaft, and it's German. And I have set the language to German. It's very important to do this job because in the output, that language will be taken into account when the text will be read by assistive technology. This will also improve spell check and pronunciation, of course. If you are working on a project where multiple language are a thing, well, in that case, you can help yourself with styles, paragraph styles, or character styles. In this case, I set up 3 different character styles that represent definitions in different language in the text. So it's very easy to select a word and assign a different language. Okay, tip number 6, use articles. Articles is a panel in InDesign, and it is also a way to organize the content of the page of the whole document and control how the order of the content. When you look at a page, we choose the order of the content. You choose how to read the content in which order. And the order that we read the content on the page may not be the same order that layout presents. So using the article panel gave us the ability to assign, to organize the content in different articles and assign the correct order of different objects of the page. It's very easy to use the article panel. I can just take a text frame or an image frame or an object of the page and drag it to the article panel. And then once the object is in the article panel, you can change the order and you can organize the different part of the layout in articles, which are main parts of the content. This is the function of InDesign that most affects the text structure in the PDF. So let's go for a moment in the PDF and look at the and have a look at the accessibility tags panel. The accessibility tags are following the structure that I gave to the document using the article panels, creating different articles, organizing the content separating, for example, the cover from the table of contents, from the other chapters. And inside the articles, the content is properly tagged following the order that I gave in the article panel. So this is a very important part, um, because you can group logically the content of the layout and you can organize it. When you export your layout in PDF, it's very important to remember to check or activate Create Tagged PDF. That's a way to transport the article and the structure that you create in the article panel to the PDF. Okay, tip number 7, make the most of tables. That could be an entire webinar because table is a quite complex topic. But there are two basic, fundamental tips that I can give. The first one is to use header rows. In the table properties, the table options, InDesign gives you the possibilities to select how many header rows there are in the table. Header rows are rows that define the content that will follow in the entire column. So if we focus on the content, we could say that all the content of this particular column, the second column, refer to year 2015. And setting the header rows is the proper way to classify all the content of the column. And that has a direct impact on how the content is tagged in the PDF, because in the table, those cells have a spatial role in the PDF, and they are tagged as headers. And so whenever you read the content on the table, you can ask to your technology, how is this content classified? And your reader can go back to the header and tells you which type of content you are reading in a specific cell of the table. Reading the table is a time-consuming task, so having a reference of the content is fundamental. The second tip that I can give for table is to keep table regular. A regular table is a table where the number of cells is equal in each row. Like this one, we don't have merged cells and we don't have title cells. The table is representing just the data, and that's very important. So I'm quoting a guideline now. Irregular tables are almost always a strong indicator of improper table structure. Navigation in a table is it could be very difficult if there are merged tables or if the content is not regular. I show you an example of an irregular table. Okay. Now I'm showing a table that have some titles injected in the structure. So yes, there is a header, there is data on the table, but at some in 2 points, the data is interrupted with titles. So it's very difficult to navigate in this table from a accessible perspective. The solution is to split complex tables in multiple tables. Now I'm showing a complex table, and now I'm showing a possible solution. Any complex table can be splitted in multiple regular tables. Okay, the tip number 8 is to consider the usage of anchor objects or inline object when there is graphic content flowing in the text or inline. And I'm showing a good example of it. Um, you have to insert a logo or a small icon in the text, and that content, that icon, is following the text and should reflow with the text. So if you change the width of the column, for example, that logo should reflow because it has a specific position in the paragraph. And it should also be placed in the correct position in the text structure. Should be exactly there between those two words. So an inline object or an anchor object is an object that is placed or pasted into the text, and well, it reflows like any other character, but it's not a letter, it's not a character, it's a graphic object, and that's an inline object. And in this case, it's an image, and it has an alternative text. Okay, so I should specify the alternative text for that image. So in the reading process, at that point on the paragraph, the alternative text is read for that image. So the tip in this case is to always anchor image and graphics to text when needed for a logical reading flow, and using alternative text, descriptive alternative text, if those elements are not textual. Um, Tip number 9, use the power of table of contents. Well, table of contents is the part of the layout where you can have an overview of what the layout offer. And we started from paragraphs and from titles, and we are ending with paragraphs and titles summarized on this page. There is a specific functionality in InDesign to create table of contents, and it's here in the layout menu. And the table of contents in InDesign is created automatically starting from the paragraph style. At the beginning of the presentation, I assigned different paragraph styles to different levels of titles, also assigning them different tags to manage their role in the structure. And everything is connected. The titles, the level of those titles, and the way I format those titles. Well, table of contents can be built following the paragraph styles that you assign to the different titles, and it's automatically generated by InDesign, taking the content from the pages and building the text of the table of content. It's very important to use the specific functionality in InDesign for different reasons. And from an accessibility perspective, there is a spatial classification for the table of contents, a spatial tags classification that makes the table of contents recognizable by assistive technologies. So if I go in the page of the table of contents, I see that table of content is tagged FT as TOC. And that's why, and that's because InDesign built the table of contents based on the actual titles in the layout and tagged the table of contents accordingly. So there are references to the content, there are links to the pages of the document, and it's following the structure of the layout. There is also an option during export, a very important option, that lets you include bookmarks. And bookmarks are essential for quick navigation of the document and are generated automatically from the table of contents, from the InDesign table of contents. I'm sure you know the bookmarks in the PDF. In this case, there are bookmarks that helps you to quickly navigate into the document. They are generated from the table of content. So direct connection between content, paragraphs, styles assigned to those paragraphs, table of content, and bookmarks. They work all together, and everything starts from a proper classification of titles and paragraph styles. Okay. Now, the last tip is include metadata. Let's imagine that you are searching for a document on your desk and you have 50 printed documents on the table and you are searching for a specific one. Well, you're not going to read every text of every document. You quickly scroll, you quickly search for the content that you need, and maybe you look at the first line of every document, or you look at the title, and then you move to the next one. So there is a way to look at the document and know what the content is, even without reading the whole document. Metadata has the same role for digital documents. I go to File Info in InDesign, and I find some fields here: the document title, the author title, the description, the keywords, and a copyright notice. These are the main metadata informations. And what is interesting is that they are readable even without opening the document. And those are the information that normally are used by devices when you search for a document and you quickly search in your computer for a specific document, and metadata are taken into account for that search. Interestingly, a document will be searched many, many times more uh, than the times you will actually read or open the document. So maybe there is a document that you open once a year, but it is included in search result every day. It's very important to fill in the metadata fields with significant content, and that is fundamental for better searchability and accessibility compliance. Those fields are mandatory in accessible standards, especially title, author, and description. But also keywords are very important. So please check that those information are then transferred to the PDF, and you have the same panel in Adobe Acrobat, for example. If you go to document properties, you can check that all this information are ported to the PDF. Okay, so some conclusion to these tips. And the first one, very, very important, content, semantic and graphic design should work always together to the best accessibility result. Um, when you start to create a layout and you want to make it accessible, you should understand the content structure. You should study the content structure of what you are putting on a page, uh, because that will be very important to create the equivalent accessible structure. Every detail matters when you create layout, and just like when cleaning a house, for example, every detail left behind will be immediately visible. The same is for text and for typography. So for the best accessibility, please do care about every detail of the text, every single letter or character. In that way, you have to try to put as much as quality you can creating layouts. Knowing the technology is fundamental. There is a specific option in Adobe InDesign or in Canva Affinity for each of the accessibility detail. And that's all. I'm available for questions.
Thank you so much. We had a couple questions come through and we had a lot of
Yep.
discussion in the chat. One of our attendees, Lizzie, was nice enough to kind of summarize the chat question into the Q&A. So we'll start there. The question is, when we follow the accessibility process, but a screen reader can't recognize the exported PDF and says content is empty, what are the best things to troubleshoot and check, please? And thank you.
Um, Screen reader can recognize the exported PDF. Content is empty. Okay. The screen reader is, in that case, searching for the text structure, the accessibility tags. So if the accessibility tag structure is empty, that's an empty document for a screen reader. Let's make the example reversing the concept. Let's imagine a document with a very good tag structure, but white pages, blank pages, or text white on white. That's the same situation reversed. So if you use a screen reader, uh, that document will be perfectly readable. And if you look at your screen, the document will be empty. So they have to work together. Um, in that case, the correct solution is go back to the original, to the source, and if it's a good structure layout, um, maybe it's just a matter of checking the correct output options. If it's not, you have to tag or structure uh, your layout from the source. Starting from the source is the key.
Thank you.
Okay.
There are two more questions in the Q&A.
Okay, how do you set the language of text if the language isn't an option in InDesign or Acrobat? Well, our organization produced PDF material in Somali, but Somali isn't an option when creating InDesign or setting the language of the exported PDF in Acrobat. Okay, I understand that. And in that case, there are some tools, some professional tools that lets you um, do everything you can for accessibility in InDesign, and then globally modify the document language in the PDF. Okay, that's a way. It's a specific case, so I suggest to have a look at some um, Acrobat or yeah, Acrobat plugins that lets you uh, post-produce the the accessibility or correct the accessibility when the PDF is already done. Okay. How do you set the scope for a table, or is it already set when you select headers? Um, I'm not sure to understand correctly. Um, um, the question there is um, okay, a table from in this case, at least in InDesign, is just a table. There is no other information attached to it. Um, and the structure is built automatically in by InDesign. The tag structure is built automatically in InDesign as long as you use the table property. So one table, and in the options, you set the correct amount, the correct number of header rows or footer rows, and the correct regular number of columns and rows. And at this stage, there is no other properties to set. When you select headers, however, in InDesign, automatically during the export process, they will be tagged as headers. Okay. Um, okay. To add to the previous summary, tags were exported and accessibility checker passes in Acrobat. The exported PDF has structured tags. Okay, okay, that's something more that clarifies the previous case. Um, okay, the exported PDF has structured tags, but a specific screen reader is not able to read the structure. It's probably something that you should search in the screen reader software. Okay. If it passes the accessibility checker and you see text, it's probably something related to the reader software. That's strange actually. Um, the reader should be compliant to that, should be able to read the structured text. Okay, how do you make sure that math and STEM material will read correctly for a screen reader? Um, well, again, we are in a particular period of time. We are switching from PDF 1 to PDF 2.0. Um, PDF 2.0 is not yet diffused. Okay, so we have to wait for probably a few years. But PDF 2.0 have the possibility to include MathML directly in the content of the page, and it's built around accessibility. Okay. So that will solve, and during this time and during the adoption time, also readers will conform to that. At the moment, there are uh, different techniques. Uh, One of the suggested techniques for that is to attach MathML files to PDF. PDF can have attachments and just like email, and you can refer to those attachments in the content of the PDF. That's the current suggested technique. In the future, um, the math ML content will be included directly in the content of the page. If you search for content or knowledge about PDF 2.0 on the PDF Association website, you will find a lot of best practice for that. It's evolving. Okay, that's a knowledge question. Any tips on successful study or preparation and passing the accessible document specialist test? Well, there are preparation documents on our website. There are preparation documents that you can study and you can follow. And if you follow all the recommendations and all the quoted source material, um, you will have all the knowledge that you need for passing the accessible document specialist certification. I have to say that experience on creating accessible document and testing them is quite important for that. Okay, I think I covered all the questions.
Thank you so much. I'd like to say thank you today to our wonderful speaker, as well as our wonderful captioner and ASL team. We do have some very exciting webinars coming up soon. We have our subject matter expert webinar, or today was the subject matter expert webinar, but on March 5th, we will start our Title II mini series with document editing and amendments, aka redlining for government agencies. March 17th, the Title II mini series continues with our ADA Title II compliance, no cost and low cost actions you can take today. And then March 18th, we will have our Digital Accessibility Professional Education series continuing with Inclusive by Design, building content everyone can access. Finally, March 19th, our Title II mini-series will continue with Beyond Remediation, getting your PDF Title II ready. If you enjoyed today's webinar and are not a member yet, you can join over 10,000 accessibility professionals in over 100 countries and get complimentary access to live professional education webinars and our library of archived webinars, free courses, networking platforms, and more. Again, thank you today, everyone, for joining us, as well as to our speaker, our captioner, and our ASL team. Thank you so much and have a great day.